All right, we are ready. I told you 7 minutes and we were pretty close. Thank you for your patience. Would like to welcome each one of you here tonight. I think we are in for a great treat, and I already sense a very positive, enthusiastic spirit in this room. Wonderful. I'm just looking forward to our presentations tonight. We have David Asscherick with us. He is a speaker that has traveled the world. Of course, over here in the United States, he has taught. He has taught in Europe, where he met his wife, his lovely wife, Violetta. And just recently came back from Australia, where he actually gave a similar seminar to what we're going to experience over the next 3 weekends. So I'm looking forward to that. Tonight, 2 topics. Who was right, Jesus or Darwin? Why do children suffer? Now, I would like to just make a little announcement about a couple books that we were able to get from Lee Strobel. The first one is called The Case for a Creator, since we're talking about the question of creation and evolution. So some of you might be interested in this one. And the same book, Case for a Creator for Kids, they're going to be available after the first session here, and on a donation basis. We would like to invite you, for those of you that are interested, you can give a donation on that. And we'll have more books over the next few weekends, so we don't have anything else besides those 2 out there. Also, registration will be tomorrow night. We just kind of wanted to flow in tonight and get going and not have to spend too much time on registration, so we'll do that tomorrow. And as you came in, you might have seen a table that has some refreshments hidden. So we'll have to see what it is. I don't know what it will be, but that will have to wait till after the second meeting. In between the 2 meetings, there'll be just a 7 to 10 minute break, so you can, maybe use the restroom or stand up and stretch a little bit, and then we'll move right on. So without further ado, I would like us to just invite God in prayer and open with prayer. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for the opportunity that you give us to share together in studying. We ask that you will guide us, keep our minds on the subject, and we do pray for David that you give him clarity of thought as he shares with us. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. David, good to have you here.
Thank you, Pastor Lutz. All right, good evening, everyone. Want to begin by apologizing for the delay. As Pastor Lutz said, when technology works, it's a great blessing, and when it doesn't, it seems to be a bit of a curse. There are some ideas that seem like really good ones, probably to the engineers that create them, but then later, when they break down, they seem like really bad ideas. And I can testify to that. My wife and I, a few years ago, bought a minivan that had electronic doors, automatic doors. Seemed like a really good idea, probably at the time. Until after about 100,000 miles, the doors stop working, and then you need to get the motors replaced, and they're like $2,000. It's worth more than the value of the car. So then you just end up crawling in through the front seat, and it leaves a little bit to be desired. It's not exactly elegant. So anyway, I just want to thank you very kindly for your patience, and our presentations tonight will go on, and we'll get this thing sorted out so that tomorrow night we'll be able to start right on time. First of all, I just want to welcome you all here. As Pastor Lutz said, I've had the privilege of speaking not just all over the United States of America, but I've traveled all over the world as well. And this particular series of lectures that I'll be delivering over the course of the next 3 weekends. How many weekends is it, everyone? 3 weekends, and there will be 2 sessions per night on Saturday night and then Sunday night. That's it. So Saturday night, Sunday night, 2 sessions per night. We'll get 12 meetings in 3 weekends. And this particular series of lectures I actually developed about this time last year and delivered them for the first time in Brisbane, or just south of Brisbane, Australia, a place called Kingscliff. And when I originally was talking to Pastor Lutz and we talked about the kind of presentation that he wanted, I thought this would be a good one. I have a number of different presentations that I do, but I'm really excited about this one, and I'm excited about the opportunity to present it a second time. So I want to thank Pastor Lutz for the privilege of being here, the Springfield Seventh-day Adventist Church for the invitation. And without further ado, I'm going to move a little more quickly through this first presentation just so we can get back on schedule and I don't keep you too terribly late tonight. Let me see if that's going to work. Great. All right. So our presentation tonight is titled, Who Was Right, Jesus or Darwin? And when you first hear that title, you might operate under the impression that this is going to be primarily about creation and evolution. And certainly that is a controversy in the world today. And we're not actually going to be talking about that in particular, at least not the evidence for creation versus evolution. It's actually a little different presentation. When we ask the question, who was right, Jesus or Darwin, we're actually going to be asking a far more fundamental question, and I'll get to that in just a second. But the way I'd like to transition into our presentation here, the way I'd like to try and understand it, is by introducing this man to you. Now, of course, you know who the man on the right is. Who's that? That's the former president, George W. Bush. And does anyone know, with a raising of hands, who the man on the left is? Okay, those of you that know, who is that? Okay, that's right. That's Dr. Ben Carson. Dr. Ben Carson is arguably one of the greatest surgeons to ever grace our planet. He presently holds the directorship at Johns Hopkins University, which is arguably the greatest or one of the greatest medical institutions in the world today. And he's actually the director of the Pediatric Neurosurgery Clinic there and has been for a number of years. He is quite an interesting fellow. He's received 50 honorary degrees. He has written hundreds of journals, hundreds of articles that have been published in peer-reviewed journals. And really just an absolutely fascinating man. His story is one in which he went from great poverty. There's nothing I can do about it. He went from great poverty and actually ascended to the very height of academic and professional success. This is a book called Gifted Hands, the Ben Carson story, that's been written about his story. And it's really quite fascinating. And if you're not interested in the book, you could watch the movie that was produced in 2009. Cuba Gooding Jr. is the one that portrays Dr. Carson in the video. So the short version is that he is an extremely accomplished, very well-known professional surgeon and doctor and even an academician. He's somebody who is at the very uppermost echelon of his particular field, which is pediatric neurosurgery. In fact, he very bravely and amazingly performed the first ever hemispherectomy, the first successful hemispherectomy in 1987, in which there were two conjoined Siamese twins that were joined not at the hip or at the elbow, they were joined in their brains. And Dr. Carson actually went in about a 22, 23-hour surgery, divided the two children, and both of them lived. And it was a groundbreaking surgery performed in 1987. He has subsequent to that performed a number of successful hemispherectomies. He's just an extraordinary man. Now, you might be saying, okay, what does this have to do with who was right, Jesus or Darwin? Does anyone know what this place is here? I'd be very surprised if you did. This is actually a university in the South called Emory University. And the reason that I'm going to tell you about Dr. Carson is that just this year, Dr. Carson was slated to give the commencement address for the graduates at Emory University. Emory University is one of the top research universities in the United States of America, ranked by U.S. News & World Report as like the 20th best university here. And he was slated to give the commencement address for the graduating class in May of this year. But there's a very interesting thing that happened in the context of him giving the commencement address. There were a number of faculty and students who protested Dr. Carson's coming and delivering the commencement speech at Emory University. And I want to just share with you, actually, the letter that they wrote in protest to Dr. Carson's coming to Emory University. And this is what they wrote. It says, "We are writing to call the attention of the Emory community to this year's commencement speaker's denial of evolution." We're speaking here of Darwinian evolution. Dr. Ben Carson is a world-renowned neurosurgeon who has advanced medicine and who has supported the education of countless children through his philanthropic organization. These accomplishments can provide a great inspiration to graduating Emory students. But as those students, their families, and the Emory community listen to his speech, we ask you to also consider the enormous positive impact of science on our lives and how that science rests squarely on the shoulders of evolution. Last page here, it says, "What is most deeply concerning about Dr. Carson's dismissal of evolution is that he equates the acceptance of evolution with a lack of ethics and morality. And ethics here, we're going to talk a little bit about ethics actually tonight, quite a bit, especially in our second presentation on the suffering of children. Ethics just means how you ought to behave. Ethical behavior, the right way of behaving and acting. And so it says here, what is most deeply concerning about Dr. Carson's dismissal of evolution is that he equates the acceptance of evolution with a lack of ethics and morality. He states, quoting now Dr. Carson, now this is Carson's quotation, that really riled up some of the faculty and student body of Emory University. Ultimately, if you accept the evolutionary theory, you dismiss ethics. That is to say, the grounds for right behavior and right actions. You don't have to abide by a set of moral codes. You determine your own conscience based on your own desires. Now, let me just sort of unpack for you what's happening here. It's a very simple thing, and it's actually very simple to understand, but quite fascinating what was taking place there at Emory. The short version is this. He was invited as someone who's delivered dozens and dozens of commencement speeches at universities all over the world. Would you come and deliver our commencement exercise for our 2012 graduating class? He accepted, and then someone discovered that Dr. Carson is a Christian. He's not only a Christian, he's somebody who's a Christian who denies the scientific legitimacy of Darwinian evolution on many grounds. Now, in this particular case, he says, well, here's one of my main problems with evolution. If we embrace evolution, it removes, it effectively pulls the rug or the tablecloth out from underneath right behavior or any absolute grounds for right behavior. And of course, the staff and some of the students, not all of the staff, but some of the staff and students at Emory University, they protested this, and they said not only is Dr. Carson denying evolution, which science rests squarely upon, they claim, but he actually suggests that in dismissing evolution, there is a bigger reason. There's something else at stake here, and that is the idea of morality or ethics. And that's what I want to talk about tonight. The playing together of right behavior, right thinking, and right acting with this idea of where did we come from. There are four great questions that humanity in every culture, every language, every place has wrestled with from the beginning of time. From time immemorial, humanity has wondered, why am I here? Origin, or where am I from, excuse me, origin. Why am I here? Meaning, where am I going? Destiny. And is there any purpose in life? Morality. Origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. And Carson claims that there is a direct correlation between believing in evolution and not having any ground for ethics. Now, we should probably understand a little bit about Charles Darwin before we go too much further. He was born in England in 1809. He attended Cambridge University to study for the Church of England's priesthood, but through a series of events that we'll describe here in just a bit, some of those events, he actually left the priesthood, left the study of the priesthood at the age of 22. And in 1831, he was given the opportunity to sail on a ship called, does anyone know? The HMS Beagle. And the HMS Beagle was a scientific exploration, that left England and sailed all the way around down the southern tip of South America and up and spent, the thing that he's best known for took place in the Galapagos Islands, of course, on the west side of Ecuador. And 1831, he began to sail. The journey lasted 5 years, and it was on this particular journey that slowly but surely Darwin began to lose hold on his faith in God and his belief in the Bible, and he began to embrace a naturalistic explanation for the things that he was observing in the natural world. He went as a naturalist, and the various things that he observed on his expedition, he later systematized into a way of thinking about the world around us that we know simply and colloquially as the theory of evolution. His book was published in 1859, titled On the Origin of Species, at the age of 50. And by that point, Darwin had completely abandoned any residual religion or faith that he had in the Bible. Now, very interestingly here, a quotation from B. Warfield. It says, "Thus the doctrine of evolution, once heartily adopted by him, Darwin, gradually undermined his faith." By the way, the slides won't look like that. That's just a product of our technological difficulties tonight. They'll be much more easy to read tomorrow night. It says, until he cast off the whole of Christianity as an unproved delusion. The process was neither rapid nor unopposed. He speaks of his unwillingness to give up his belief and of the slow rate at which unbelief crept over him, although it became at last complete. And almost everything that we know about Darwin is that he was a very nice person. He was an avuncular type person. That just means he was uncle-like, he was gracious, he was kind. And, but slowly but surely, he just found that there was no room left in his life, or he believed in the world, for religion. Now, this is actually from his book, On the Origin of Species, the introduction to that book. And this is what he writes. As many more individuals of each species are born than can possibly survive, and as consequently there is a frequently recurring struggle for existence, it follows that any being, if it vary however slightly in any manner profitable to itself, under the complex and sometimes varying conditions of life, will have a better chance of surviving, and thus be naturally selected. From the strong principle of inheritance, any selected variety will tend to propagate its new and modified form. This is what we know as the survival of the what? Fittest, or sometimes referred to as natural selection. And Darwin here is simply observing various aspects and phenomena in nature, and he's arriving at a systematizing of what he's seeing. He's putting it together, and he's saying, you know what, it looks to me like two major things are happening in the biological world. Number one, common ancestry. This idea that everything is descended from a common ancestor. To the birds and the fish and the primates and even human beings, we are all descended from a common ancestor, number one, which, by the way, many people prior to Darwin believed this idea of common ancestry, but nobody could really make a credible case for it. You know, what's the evidence for common ancestry? And this is where Darwin really made his mark, his intellectual mark on society and on the world at large. He said the way that this happened was by means of natural selection, that nature itself selects those who are best fitted to survive in their given environment. And so Darwin has come to be associated in modern minds with evolution. In fact, today we talk about Darwinism as just another name or another term for evolution. Again, I want to point out here, though, Darwin was not the founder of evolution or the creator of evolution or any other such thing. What Darwin brought to the table that no one else up to that point could bring to the table was a mechanism by which evolution could occur, and that was the survival of the fittest mechanism. He basically made it scientifically credible to believe in evolution. Now, here's an interesting point from Cornelius Hunter's book, Darwin's God. He writes this: evolution is more than just a scientific theory, if only because of its tremendous influence in areas outside of science. Notice what he says here. It is probably the most influential idea ever generated by science. Right? This is Cornelius Hunter's claim in his book, Darwin's God, an excellent book. He's basically saying that it is possible to make the case that the single most influential doctrine of science or teaching of science that has ever been produced is this idea of evolution. More than Newtonian physics, more than thermodynamics, more than any other thing that science has given us, evolution is arguably the single greatest and most amazing idea. Now, let's sort of tie together what we've learned so far. Very briefly, we talked about a man named Ben Carson who was slated to give an address at Emory University, and there was a protest made about that. And the protest was, hey, this guy doesn't believe in evolution, and he suggests that if you do believe in evolution, that it pulls the rug out from underneath ethics or right behavior. Okay? So those that were protesting were saying, no, he's got that all wrong. Right? He's just a Christian, he's crazy, he's a fanatic, he's a brilliant neurosurgeon, but his science, his wires are all crossed when it comes to science. Now, here's a very interesting thing. There's a quotation here from Dr. William B. Provine, who has subsequently died, but in 1988, he gave the Darwin Day lecture, the keynote address, and I want you to notice the 5 things that Dr. Provine says follow naturally, logically, necessarily from a belief in evolution. Now, this is someone who is an absolute advocate in the most emphatic sense of advocacy for evolution. And this is what he says. Naturalistic evolution has clear, what is that word there? Can you read that word? Clear consequences. And a consequence is something that follows from something else. Right? So if I stub my toe, the consequence is that I'm in pain. Right? or if I leave my lights on, the consequence is that my battery may go dead. So the consequence is something that follows. Does that make sense? So Provine is saying here at the 1988 keynote lecture on Darwin Day, he says, Darwin understood when he advocated his theory of evolution. Remember, he was originally a believer, and then he transitioned away from belief in God. Consequences, notice, that Charles Darwin understood perfectly. Oh, well, what are those consequences? What are those things that follow naturally, logically, and necessarily from an affirmation of an evolutionary perspective? This is what he says. Number one, no gods worth having exist. Well, in the case of Charles Darwin, that's exactly what happened. He was a believer. As he slowly began to embrace these ideas of naturalistic evolution and the survival of the fittest, there was less and less room for God in his life, and eventually he jettisoned the idea of God altogether. So Provine seems to be exactly correct there. Number two, no life after death exists. Death is just part of the natural order of things, and there is no conscious life after death. Number three, no ultimate foundation for ethics exists. Now this is very interesting. That was Ben Carson's very point, wasn't it? That was the very point that the crazy Christian neurosurgeon Ben Carson was making when he said, hey, wait a minute. My problem with evolution is that if we teach people that they're just a bunch of naked apes, that there's really no ground for any ethics or right behavior. And the faculty and students, some of them at Emory University, said, no. That's not true. That's not true at all. How can you say that? You're just a Christian fundamentalist. But here's an interesting point. An advocate for Darwinism, lecturing on Darwin Day, actually says, hey, there are consequences that follow naturally and necessarily from belief in Darwinism. Number one, no gods worth having exist. Number two, no life after death. And number three, there is no foundation for ethics. Oh, interesting. So this is an evolutionist agreeing with the very point that the Christian was making. Number four, no ultimate meaning in life exists, and human free will is non-existent. Now, what I want to try and do tonight, and we'll see how successful I can be in about the next 30 minutes here, is I want to just try to paint a picture of two versions of reality. Okay, what did I say? There are two versions of reality. And I'm going to do something that's a little dangerous. I'm not going to appeal only to your sense of logic and the sense of evidence. And I want to appeal just to your gut feeling. You understand what I'm saying? You know, we use the language, I have a hunch. I feel it in my guts. I can feel it in my bones. You know what I'm talking about? Sometimes you just have a hunch that something is right, or that something doesn't quite smell right. Or you're with me? It doesn't pass the smell test. And so tonight what I want to try and do is just paint two pictures of reality. I want to paint the picture of reality that flows naturally, logically, and necessarily from Darwin's version of reality. Okay? And then I want to paint the picture that flows naturally, necessarily, and logically from Jesus' version of reality. And then I'm going to ask you a question at the end of it. I'm going to say, in your guts, in your bones, which two of these just smells right? Which one passes the smell test? Okay? So let's do that. So at this point, Provine says there's all of these things that if you believe in Darwinian evolution, there are consequences that follow. Well, that was exactly Dr. Ben Carson's point. I'll read it to you again here. He says, ultimately, if you accept the evolutionary theory, you dismiss, what's the word? Ethics. You don't have to abide by a set of moral codes. You determine your own conscience based on your own desires. So here, the radical Darwinist, William B. Provine, this guy here, and the radical Christian, Dr. Ben Carson, are in complete agreement. They both totally agree that if you accept Darwinian evolution as a way of viewing the world, you pull the rug out from underneath any ultimate foundation for ethics. Up to this point, are we making sense? Okay, now let's try to paint the pictures here. Let's see how we can do. In 1999, a blockbuster movie was released called The Matrix, starring Keanu Reeves and Lawrence Fishburne and others, and there's subsequently been a sequel, and I think even another movie came out after that. And the idea behind the movie, the idea behind The Matrix is basically this. It's that machines, and you're going to say, well, of course, isn't this what every science fiction storyline is? But here's the point. Machines have taken over the world, right? And not only have they taken over the world, machines are actually harvesting human beings and using their energies to propagate their own world. So human beings create machines, and then now machines have taken over and rule the world, and human beings are their servants. You get the basic idea, right? It's more or less the plot of almost every science fiction movie that's probably ever been written. So it's this idea of the matrix, and human beings live in this matrix, and we are the slaves of machines. Now you might be thinking, oh man, this is science fiction stuff. I mean, who believes it? Who really could believe that a world like that could ever happen? Here's a fascinating thing. This world, in a very real sense, is exactly the world that modern evolutionists believe in. Now you've got to follow me carefully here. It's going to be required that you put on your thinking caps tonight. This idea of machines in control of human beings is actually the preeminent idea in evolutionary thinking today. But the machines are not machines made of metal and of steel and of carbon that look a little bit like your cars, but only fancier. No. The machines are actually molecules. And those molecules are, in this case, DNA. Okay, now let me just share this with you here. Deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA. This is Dr. Richard Dawkins, arguably the best-known scientific atheist in the world today. How many with a raising of hands know who this guy is? Okay. He's Richard Dawkins, author of the New York Times best-selling The God Delusion. And notice what he says here. The universe is nothing but a collection of atoms in motion. Okay, so it's nothing. The whole universe and everything in it, including you, including me, including everything. The universe is nothing but a collection of atoms in motion. Human beings are simply, what is that word? Machines for propagating DNA. Now, this is the very DNA that you learned about in high school biology, right? Deoxyribonucleic acid. It's remember the double helix structure. It looks like the staircase discovered by Francis Crick and James Watson. And this idea, he says, is that human beings are machines for what? For propagating DNA. And the propagation of DNA is a self-sustaining process. It is every living object's sole reason for living. Now, this idea is very interesting because what Charles Darwin introduced was this idea that evolution is really about the species. It takes place at the species level. That's really where the meat and potatoes of evolution is happening. But Dawkins actually published a revolutionary book titled The Selfish Gene, and he introduced a whole new concept in evolutionary theory that evolution is not just taking place at the species level, but primarily at the genetic level. What's happening is that DNA, your genes, are actually what's really taking place, and they sort of keep you around. They are the parasite, you're the host, and they are propagating themselves in humans, in dogs, in chimpanzees, in fish, in every living thing. And he published a book titled The Selfish Gene that sort of brought about this idea that the point of all biology is DNA, and they are simply machines that are in control of human beings. This is why Provine said just a moment ago, there's no free will. Because if you think you made a decision to marry that person or to go to school there or to eat that meal, you didn't really make that decision. You have the illusion of having made that decision. You're really just a host for parasite DNA machines. Science fiction stuff, right? Dr. Francis Crick, who won the Nobel Prize in 1962 for his discovery of DNA, he and James Watson together won it, he says this, now that's you, me, us, what is that word? Your joys, your sorrows, your memories, your ambitions, your sense of personal identity and free will. Okay, so basically, everything that you think is you. The things that make you happy, the things that make you sad, the things that you want to do, the things that you dream about, all of your memories, all of the photo albums in your home, you. Okay, Dr. Crick, tell us, what about us? You, all of you, are in fact no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules, namely DNA. So what's happening here is that a picture is beginning to emerge, right? We're looking at two paintings tonight. What world follows as a consequence of believing Darwin's general view of